Hello and welcome to the first session of Integrative Objects Part 2 with Alice Rekab and Anne-Francois Schmid. I'm going to pass the mic off to Alice right now.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining us. So just a few remarks on how the course will be structured. It's a little bit different than maybe you're used to. So there's a practice-based element to this course. Each course will begin with a lecture delivered by Anne and kind of developed in consultation between the two of us. And then the second part, as this is the first class, I'll simply introduce the exercise and talk a little bit about how you might want to execute it, and it'll be a Q&A and then a discussion around the points raised in Anne's lecture. For the other three parts to the course, the second part of the course will the second part of the class rather will be about showing work and discussing work with Anne, myself and the other students. So this is how we're going to run it, and I'm pretty excited. It's a new model for learning. The practical elements, we can talk a little bit more in detail about that, but just to kind of give you an idea of the structure. So I'm going to hand it over to Anne-Francoise, and she will begin to deliver the taught part, the lecture part of this class. Thanks. Over to you, Anne.
Yes. I am very happy to present our work from Alice and I. She is artist and I a philosopher. And we have an agreement for this course, a theoretical agreement that we can combine art and philosophy in another manner than as in philosophy of art. We did not create a philosophy of art. We are combining art and philosophy and art. So we have a formula. That formula is that of integrative objects and fiction. I will Voilà. And you see these formulas are complex because it is a repetition of philosophy or of art, because the signification is there is no commutativity between art and philosophy. When we combine art with philosophy, the result is not the same when we combine philosophy and art. So, the barre, comment est-ce qu'on dit, Alice? La barre. The slash, I think. The slash have two meanings. One is the meaning of the without. What is philosophy without art? What is art without philosophy? The without, the slash, yes, the slash. And the without is a form for fiction to extend philosophy in art or extend art in philosophy. And the other meaning of this slash is the underdetermination. We underdetermine philosophy by art or inversely. So the two meanings, these two meanings are the same if we have a point of exteriority from philosophy and from art. And this point of exteriority is to a point of contingency. With this, we have material, discourse of philosophy, works of art, concept, and contingency. These three are our agreement to develop our dialogue on philosophy and art. Material, concepts, contingency. So I will begin with the idea of in philosophy. Philosophy classically says the truth. So it implies an order of reason, perhaps, or an order of the arguments which are developed by each philosophy with its method and rigor. There are several books on the construction or the structure or the architectonic of the philosophy. It is a book of Etienne Souriau, a book of Martial Guéroult, a book of Derrida, books of the book of Gallet, Jean-Louis. Voilà. And classically, we think then that a philosophy, a new philosophy, happens when this philosophy can critique or correct another philosophy or several of them. But I think it is now another manner to invent in philosophy. Not only critiquing, but we can invent philosophy if we decompose first philosophy into its ingredients and accept the multiplicity of rights of philosophy. Why the multiplicity of rights? It's not easy because when invented philosophy, he expels some other philosophers. Or in the same time, he constructs a lineage between philosophies. For example, Deleuze constructs a lineage between Spinoza, Nietzsche, Bergson, Deleuze. It's not all the philosophies what determine the philosophy of Deleuze. Only a lineage. Is that we can invent philosophy in multiplicity of philosophy. Multiplicity of philosophy, not of truth, of philosophy. And
Anne-Françoise, pardon, juste
yes.
pour un point de clarification. La multiplicité de droits de philosophie, c'est le français.
Ouais.
Ah, so the
voilà,
right.
c'est le français. The right of philosophies.
So the right, the truth and the right, the correct, or the
multiplicity of philosophy, not of truth.
Ah, okay. So
okay.
So,
when I write now in philosophy, I have to think I write with other philosophers with hypotheses very different and perhaps contradictory. And it is important to have this problem in the writing itself. I cannot write as if were a new progress in philosophy. We are multiple. We are multiple. We are not isolated. But it is a problem for philosophy, because classical philosophy is synced with the idea that each philosophy is isolated. It's very important. I will try to said there was some meetings between philosophers. In 1647, Descartes meets Pascal in Paris. Leibniz came to find Spinoza in Amsterdam. On March 22, Bergson and Russell have a meal in a restaurant in Paris together. And it is very interesting. We have no word, no language, no historical reference for these meetings. Each philosopher is mute on these meetings, very muting. I think it is not only an historical particularity, but I think it is a norm for philosophy. It is possible to meet two or three philosophies in the frame of history of philosophy. The history of philosophy is made for construct the possibility of compare two philosophies, or three philosophies, etc. To compare Plato and Aristotle, to compare Descartes and Leibniz, to compare Deleuze and Sartre, for example. But when the creators of philosophy are meeting, they cannot. They said nothing on this. There are, I think, a lot of reasons for this. The first is that if we create in philosophy, oh, my cat, excuse me.
Vous avez une nouvelle chatte?
Yes. Yes. When we create in philosophy, we cannot understand the argument of the other. It's not possible. I remember a séance in Collège international de philosophie. And Jacques Derrida have Derrida present la ruelle for 100 persons in a meeting. And Derrida says on la ruelle, what la ruelle has said, what I have not before said. So it is impossible to understand. I think it is not, Derrida was a good philosopher, a good man, but he cannot see another philosopher contemporary theater. It's not possible. I think in the there are no meanings with the meeting of philosophers. I do not know two philosophers writing together. Philosophy with other disciplines, yes, Deleuze with Guattari, for example. Yes, it exists. But two philosophers, creators, who write together, I do not know. I think the creation philosophy is made with the illusion of isolation of the philosophy. It's an illusion because an isolated philosophy does not exist. We can talk on a particular philosophy if we have an idea of the great philosophy, of the philosophy. And we cannot talk about the great philosophy without use a particular philosophy. We have to construct a lineage to talk in philosophy. Now, my hypothesis is we can invent differently in philosophy when we have the condition of the multiplicity of right of philosophy. Voilà. And
perhaps parle un peu sur le non-exclusion.
Non-exclusion, yes. Yes,
and
my project.
The principle of non-exclusion and this principle of the multiplicity of the right of philosophy.
Right. Yes.
Are these connected? Just to connect with the course that we did previously and the introduction of the concept of non-exclusion as part of this methodology.
Yes, it's true. It's true. My problem in my profession, I was philosopher among scientists first in a École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne, in Institut National des Sciences Appliquées, et Mines Paris-Tech, et INRA, Institut National of, and so I saw regularly that new methods was excluded in the descriptions of methodology of science. The about science was talks with one century of delay. 1 century. I think we had now it is a little different because there are new works on modelization, simulation, etc. But in a few time ago, we have an epistemology with the idea, central idea of theory, balanced with experience and observation, and all other ingredients was linked by this great opposition between theory and experience. So the idea of model, the idea of simulation, the idea of hypothesis, etc., was not very well explained, have no autonomy. So where I taught, I work a lot with scientists to learn to non-exclude new methods in sciences. It is very difficult to admit methods other than we apply when they in application in our field. And my work was to make exchanges between methods and to have some attention to the actual science. The classical epistemology have only past examples. It's very difficult to construct an epistemology who is susceptible, capable to see the novelties in science. And because this, I have the mood that it would be necessary to have the posture of non-exclusion of method. The meaning is not that there is no difference between science and non-science. It is not relativity. It is a posture on science and a posture in epistemology to create new fields, new concepts, new operators to understand the contemporary sciences. So, and in philosophy, parallelly, I have a long experience to read Leibniz and Descartes. I was 12. I read Leibniz and Descartes. And I do not know if it is possible to choose between them. What posture to have in philosophy with the philosophies? What is the signification to said I am Cartesian or I am Leibnizian? If I am Cartesian, I insist on invention in philosophy. Creation of the eternal truth. It's an extraordinary concept. But with Leibniz, it is possible to construct an hyper-compatibility between philosophies. The postures are very different. And why I have to choose between the two postures. Each posture bring with it new concepts on philosophy, on the relation between philosophies. And my hypothesis was that the relation between one philosophy have a relation with the relation of a philosophy with other disciplines. It's a complex. I work in this complex. Compatibilities between philosophies, and this compatibility is not possible if we do not accept the multiplicity of right of philosophy. And so d'autre part, non-exclusion of new methods of science. I see in history of sciences the idea of historian who does not accept the alternance of theory and experience. In France, a great example, the geologist who was a minister of culture and scientific research in France, Claude, comment est-ce qu'il s'appelait? Ah, je retrouverai son nom. I will find his name. But he had this idea. It is theory and experience. And in the same time, he was opposed to the climate change. Very opposed. With other reasons than Americans. With the reasons that science is only theory and experience. And the method used by the specialists of climate are with method we are not very scientific because they depend not they do not depend of theories. So I have to extend epistemology, not to destruct, to extend with modelization and simulation. I was in France, I think the first just before Franck Varenne, who is now the specialist, no, Varenne. And in philosophy, the implication of the acceptation of the multiplicity of right of philosophy is a change of style. We write not in a particular philosophy, we write in a generic space with the concept of philosophy. And to see the empiric, we need to have superposition of concepts of different philosophies. So I think now, to invent now in philosophy, we have to combine concepts of different philosophies, and with the idea we can change this concept. We knew only some particular philosophies, but we can work as if it was a generic space for all philosophies. I did not introduce the idea of death of philosophy, which is a very classical idea. No, philosophy continues. But I propose not each particular philosophy, but a posture on construction of generic space for the understanding of the multiplicity of philosophy. Change the style in writing the philosophy. So there is so a relation between my work in philosophy and on the sciences. It is this idea of non-exclusion, the idea what it is possible to pass from one philosophy to another. It's the principle of generosity. Generosity is a Cartesian concept. C'est souvent oublié. Descartes is the philosopher of generosity because the time is for him disconti generosity. Yes. Generosity. Is the thinker of generosity because he thought discontinue and it is impossible to pass instant of time to another without this generosity. It was the first passion for him, and all the inventions and the generosity go together in the Descartes. But invention implies exclusion. And Leibniz have another posture where the exclusion are nothing. Oh, he critiques very hard Descartes. For him, the method of Descartes was only a joy for little children, babies, jokes for babies, the method of Descartes. But he constructs, nevertheless, a compatibility, hyper-compatibility between philosophies. Why hyper-compatibility? Because the hypothesis, Leibniz knew the philosopher construct hypothesis. It's extraordinary in his century. And he thought that it is possible to respect the particularity of each philosophy, even if the hypotheses of the philosophies are contrary. Hypercompatibility. Hypercompatibility permits the articulation of contraries, not only to different ideas, but about ideas contradictory. Yes, so the idea of the meetings between philosophers, they cannot say anything. It is a French philosopher, Dumoncel, who imagine in a text the conversation between Bergson and Russell. Bergson and Russell knew between them. Bergson have in 1905 give the possibility to Louis Couturat to give a course in Collège de France, on Russell and mathematical logic. Logicisme, comme on disait autrefois, logicisme. And Bergson give this occasion for the theory of Russell. It's extraordinary. I think Russell did not the same for Bergson in London or in America. But the discussion between them was impossible. It is another reason we construct a new philosophy. This construction on misunderstanding from the other contemporary philosophy. The misunderstanding is a foundation. In the foundation of the illusion of isolation when we create philosophy.
Un moment, François, s'il vous plaît. The misunderstanding.
Misunderstanding.
Ok, le malentendu.
Voilà, le fait que l'on ne comprend pas, le malentendu.
Malentendu,
Le
oui.
malentendu.
The misunderstanding
Le malentendu.
is the beginning.
Misunderstanding, voilà.
Just to clarify.
On sent, oui, comment est-ce qu'on dit sentir? Sentir. On sent qu'il y a une nouvelle philosophie. Oui.
It is the beginning of and creates.
Oui. We have the idea it is a new philosophy, but with our creation, it is impossible to understand completely the attitude of the other philosophers. A meeting, I talk on Derrida and Laruelle, on Bergson and Russell, on Descartes and Pascal and Leibniz and Spinoza. And I think if we will understand philosophy in its multiplicity, we have to understand this. It is a misunderstanding in the creation of philosophy. And when we create a new philosophy, we create a lineage and we exclude other philosophy. And one of my problems is to have it excluded in philosophy and in scientific method. So I think it is a thesis for this course in philosophy that there are other critique and correction. I have no, I did not critique a philosopher. Derrida, Kant is Kant, Aristotle is Aristoteles. I cannot I have to critique this or this. Or I have to manifest a contradiction into this philosophy or that old philosophy. I think it is always possible to see contradictions in a philosophy. So it is not necessary to manifest this. This is normal. So the invention do have a new style. A style with the combination of philosophical concepts of different philosophy, but with sciences and other disciplines. Today it is with art. We will combine art and philosophy. In science, you see, for example, Laruelle combine in matrices philosophy and quantic, and we think it is impossible to know philosophy if we do not have another science, another discipline. He chose quantic for methodological reasons, because quantic does not have for object the natural world, but operators, matrices, etc. So it is a gap, another method. In epistemology, I create non-epistemology, or an extension of epistemology, whose objects are not directly the science. If I have a science as a paradigm, I cannot see the new method. And if you see the history of epistemology, for example, Popper, Feyerabend, Lakatos, etc., they who rest on the idea of theory. The example, treated example, are the same. Mechanics, little quantic, and etc. Example repeated. The examples are made to be repeated, but it is a fixation who create difficulties to understand contemporary science. If you see the introduction of the book of Zalamea, Synthetic Philosophies of Contemporary Mathematics, edited by Urbanomic Sequence. The idea is that we cannot we cannot understand contemporary mathematics if we will rest this mathematics only on sets theory. Even with numerous sets theory, modern sets theory, we have to understand contemporary mathematics. We have to construct theories of intermediaries range, théorie de portée intermédiaire, to articulate the mathematical constructions with the diverse theories who are important with mathematics, not only set theory, not only categories. I think it is a great idea. And this idea would to an idea to understand biology. It is an idea of Jean Gaillon. A philosopher of biology. Biology is an immense range of different disciplines. It's very interesting. It is a new idea of science without the unity, the illusory unity of physics. It's very interesting. And if we will understand the current biology, it is necessary to construct intermediary theories. So it's very complex. And we have to construct a generic space. The first idea of generic space in science was, I think, Poincaré. I think the name of generic space is not here, but Poincaré thinks it is if we have a proposition in a discipline, it is possible to decompose it to combine with other disciplines. It that we try Alice and I between art and philosophy. And so it was not an absurd idea because he worked in science. So Poincaré constructs a theory of relativity in the same time as Einstein and Lorentz in the same time, but the construction was very different. It is a problem, a compatibility in a generic space. We have the experience of Michelson and Morley. We have the classical mechanics. We have the deformation of Lorentz. Why it is possible to generalize them with compatibility? So is the problem of the theory of relativity of Poincaré. Einstein has a different method. So his problem was to generalize the equation of Maxwell. It is not a generalization by Einstein, but it is a possibility of generalization on a generic space. Einstein, yes. Einstein, yes, Albert. And the attitudes are very different. And in France, there are some ancient students of Polytechnic who are trying in the colloquium to see the theory of relativity is not the theory of Einstein, but that of Poincaré. And it was a great injustice because Einstein was publishing in Annalen der Physik and Poincaré published his theory of relativity in the review of Circolo Matematico di Palermo. It was a great review, the review of the Circolo Matematico di Palermo, because the mathematics are very important in Italy in the beginning of but it was not a review of physics. It was not in Deutschland, and this is there are discussions in France to this, but it is I think a very great difference between Poincaré and Einstein in the methodology. For Einstein, the theory was very important. For Poincaré, it is important to generalize products of experiments, the effect of experiments with theories new, very good new, ils sont bien connus. Voilà, the theory of relativity. Oh, it's my idea of non-exclusion. It is for each problem, I think, a different ways to approach. The role of philosophy in science and for ethics in science is to enrich the alternatives.
Enrich?
Now, enrich the alternatives. Enrichir les alternatives. Now, we work very, very speedy in science. It's no good. There is an American philosopher and geologist. Robert Kodeman, who have published a book 2 years ago, Sustainable Knowledge. And he proposed a posture to another posture between science, non-exclusive, and with an idea of philosophy in the field and science in the field. With internet, it's possible. So, how to develop philosophy, epistemology, ethics for current sciences? My problem. I work too with 2 committees of ethics for animal experiment. I act for the animals, for the application of European directives, for the etc. Donc, I have some layers to interact with scientists, with philosophy, with animal ethics, with ethics, with a generic epistemology, and with operator, fiction, virtual, culture, and with a device to see novelties in science. This work is made in collaboration with a biologist, Muriel Mombrini-Doudet was the director, the president of the Greater Center of Indra, National Institute for Agronomy, the Greater, and I was in the governance of this center. And with Muriel Mombrini-Doudet, we interact together. We wrote a book, not published now, a book with the 4 hands between biologists and philosopher. I am not biologist, she does not be a philosopher, and there was a very great experience. She has no exclusion for philosophy. She's open, and I have no exclusion on scientific method. So this is the non-exclusion and the principle of generosity. It's possible to pass from one philosophy to another. It's very important. If we pass, there is one moment of relativity, because the passage between one philosophy to another is just a moment we are not in one philosophy or one in one other. Just as when we are in a train, that is in movement. The movement we think relatively with relativity is not the rest, no the movement. The moment we correct our mind. I think in philosophy, from one philosophy to another. And this passage is possible to counterbalance the impossibility of meeting of between creative philosophers. Space. The generic space and space. Yes, generic space rests on the idea that space is not a simple concept, but it is the superposition of all the concepts of spaces. I think it is the same for the time. Time is, to have an idea of time, it is necessary to have a superposition of ideas of time. And in generic space, it is possible to have sensible space, geometric space, projective space, non-Euclidean space, philosophical space, writing space, etc. And these spaces are not contradictory. It is possible to interact between one another with the undetermination of one philosophy, one science. So the principles, concepts for me to accord philosophy to other disciplines, the idea that the invention in philosophy is not only the affair of critique and correcting, but the thought of the multiplicity of right of philosophy. With this, we can decompose the philosophy. To decompose philosophy, it's not to destruct it. It is to manifest with the generic space the different ingredients in the philosophy. We have a layer of concepts, of ideas, of regulating ideas. We have the idea of empiric, what is not the same in each philosophy, but it is indefinitely, it is inevitable, the empiric. It is impossible to. The idea of contingence is linked with the empiric. Then when Malebranche said, why it rains on the oceans is not so necessary. Why it is philosophies on art so very necessary. So the idea of contingence of Alice have a relation idea of non-exclusion and of multiplicity. There is some contingency of the philosophy. but I think that Alice can say too on the materials concept and contingency. No, Alice?
Yes, well, one of the formulas that I shared with Anne, having read her notes on this paper, was this idea that she begins with the formula of the non-commutative formula of art, philosophy, philosophy, art, that we began with. I'll just cut and paste that in so we have that context for that. So this was the first formula that Anne introduced to us, and it's kind of something that we've kind of looked at in how we've been speaking together about our project and how to think about this idea of what a collaboration, or not necessarily a collaboration, but a superposition of methodologies, and what that in-between space of two types of thinking and making could look like. And I was speaking with her the other day about this idea of a different type of formula that I kind of thought surmised the formula for an arts practice, or a contemporary arts practice, maybe. I'm just typing it for you now. This idea of the concept plus material plus contingency equaling this kind of object or subject equals to X. We'll call it X for the time being because it's unidentified or radically underdetermined. Yeah, I kind of thought that this might be an interesting kind of starting point to kind of talk about how a new philosophy might also be kind of constructed along that same formula. And you spoke really nicely about this idea that you thought that this was the same for philosophy. Do you want to talk a little bit about that as well? How you feel that this art formula might also work inside philosophy? Did we lose Anne for a second?
Voilà.
Okay.
Voilà.
Okay, good. So peut-être Anne parle sur le formula concept, matériaux et contingence dans la philosophie aussi. C'est un bon topic pour discussion, je pense. I'm not sure if Anne can hear me or not. Theodore, can we have a look and see if we can get Anne back on?
Yeah, I think her signal right now is not that good.
It might have dropped.
She is in the classroom though, but can you hear us, Anne? Anne, are you here? And you may need to just log out one more time and come back in. I think you've frozen.
Is it true that it helped when everyone adjusted their bandwidth? Did that make a difference?
I can do that here as well. I'll bring mine down.
I'll do the same. I'm just going to send her a message on Facebook inviting her again.
Mm-hmm. I think I'll just talk a little bit while we're waiting to reconnect around sort of this really nice kind of piece of research that Anne has kind of presented as part of this course, with this idea of these kind of meetings and this kind of, and that it was kind of a quiet thing that happened, and this idea that there could be these kind of like domestic or very kind of personal sort of exchanges that might happen over a conversation or dinner, as Bergson and Russell had, and that these are sort of like the invisible sort of intrications and overlaps that are present in philosophies but not made obvious. And this idea of this kind of notion of a splendid isolation of a philosophy, and that this kind of sense of a supreme authorship that associates itself within a lineage, but doesn't really acknowledge the kind of these kind of environmental kind of peripheral and exchange and interaction based kind of informations that kind of infuse new ways of thinking, and thinking of what it might look like and what it might be to include that in a way of thinking, or in a way of in a methodology of thinking. And yeah, okay, people can't hear me very well. I'm going to turn my microphone off for a second. Theodore, can you hear me?
Yeah, you're very clear for me.
Okay, and Yvette has the problem. Have you heard from Anne yet?
I have not heard from her on Facebook, but it looks. Anne, are you able to hear us right now in the classroom? She still has not responded to me when I messaged her.
Okay. I can continue from here, as I think we can bring it. If Anne comes back, we will let her continue with the reading that she was doing, but we're coming up to our last half hour. I'm also conscious that it would be nice to have a little bit of discussion around this. So what I'm interested in kind of putting forward as an application of this idea of these overlaps of these meetings, and of the idea of invention in philosophy and where that site occurs, is to start with the practical investigation of that through the line. So if you look at your syllabus, you'll see that the first project, or the first exercise for this course, is investigation through the line. So I'll just read out the assignment as I said it at the beginning. So exercise 1, response to the course text through line. So that text is quite open. It's anything within the spoken text that Anne delivered, but also anything from the notes that jumped out with you. But we have also set a number of additional readings that you can dip into, so it can be inspired by that also. So for me, what I'm asking you to do for the next class, which is not next week, it's the 29th, is to identify a concept or an image in one of the course texts or in response to Anne's lecture, and develop your own two-dimensional diagram, which explicates and expands that concept within your own field of study. So this idea, which is really kind of interesting to me, is that like the students of the new centre are extremely diverse, coming from different backgrounds. And for me, it's about kind of bringing the material that's most familiar to you, or that you have most ease with, into a kind of, I guess, not a collision is the word I always think of, but into conversation with some of the concepts that maybe Anne has delivered. And this idea of bringing not only different philosophies, but different materials into a point of overlap, or into a point of superposition, but also they can be contradictory in that idea, and seeing where those kind of stresses occur and what is generated inside that, the kind of misunderstandings, as Anne puts it. And so that's kind of what I'd like to see for the next day we come together, is if you guys can do these, you can hand draw them, you can draw them in a program. How they look is very much up to you. And looking for just one, you know, because and a little bit of a description and an exploration and a response to some of the kind of ideas that Anne has introduced to us, and this kind of beginning a sort of the invention of a language, and this idea that the diagram is in a sense a means to overcome the barriers of different languages between disciplines, and offers this kind of opportunity for a co-constructed kind of communication between two disciplines, where terms and imagery and types of mapping can kind of be augmented and exchanged to create something that's kind of new, hybridized, and somewhere in transition between two spaces of knowledge. So I've said quite a lot there. So what I would like to do, I think we're still waiting to hear back from Anne. But if you had any questions with regards to the assignments, or maybe just some comments even on what Anne has said, I'd be really interested to hear them. We've got a couple of people that joined us kind of midway. Martinus, can you hear us? Theodore, could you turn on the microphone to the students?
Yes, it works. Thanks. Yeah, I was a bit late. Sorry for
no,
the time
it's fine.
difference.
It's great to have you here.
Yeah, it's great. No, it's interesting to jump in. Of course, I read some of the articles in the syllabus.
Oh, great.
And yeah, no, I have to get my head together a little bit. So yeah, I don't know. My practice, I'm an artist based in Norway, and I'm part of a university here, a technical university. So we have a continuously, yeah, let's say, a kind of desire for cross collaborations between practices of engineering and art, but this also it creates very interesting problems, but also problems that are repetitious, and they are. I think this concept of generosity is very interesting because you see that in the way. What happens when the engineering part is that they have a kind of a standard perception of knowledge about what art is, and reversed, we also have. I think, from my experience, I think we are a little bit more open-minded in that sense, that we don't really have a strict idea. But I think there's also this danger in this collaboration when there is this misunderstanding of what your practice actually entails, is that you are being utilized in the wrong, yeah, let's say, incentives of the other in that sense. And I think, especially. When you gave this example of this dinner, I think this is actually a quite interesting moment then, where both disciplines, or let's say the professionality of both disciplines, falls away, and there becomes a kind of social space. And I think this, for me, what I try to do with my practice as well is also to create this kind of social space, instead of being this kind of hegemonic two entities with their own knowledges. And I think to bring them together, it also has to become a new object. And in this sense, the integrative object is a nice term that explains it, I think. But it's interestingly, yeah, on to build upon further, I think.
Great. Yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of overlap in what you guys are trying to do in your department, and the project that Anne-Françoise and myself are involved in. I think there's also this thing of a kind of a historic kind of hierarchy of knowledge, and which knowledge is considered to be more true, and this kind of notion of veracity and truth. And I thought that was a really interesting thing that came up between in our little translation moment, where the right of philosophy and the multiple rights of philosophy, and me first misunderstanding that as that philosophy is right, that is correct, that is true, not necessarily truth, but that it has a right or a law unto itself, and that there are multiple kind of regulations in operation. And this idea of a methodology of non-exclusion, and a concept of non-exclusion also being a kind of a sort of an implementation of a democracy of thought, which is something that Lara Well talks about as well. But this idea of there being a certain equality of thought, I think that like establishing that can be quite difficult, and perhaps this is like what sort of the desire for creating a space that is generic, a space that is in somehow where hierarchies can be suspended, and that is often through the personal. When you like somebody and you listen to them and you have a respect for the way that they think and how they think, and that I think that this kind of informalized space is often where this kind of democracy can occur, because it's kind of a much more a lived democracy or an experiential democracy. I wondered if there were any other responses to what Anne said, and any other comments. It's also a chance for us to kind of introduce each other. So I wonder, Jessica, as you were our student, I was going to say last year, but it's not even that long ago, in our last course. If you could maybe, yeah, maybe just say hi, and I'd love to hear your response to Anne's text that she delivered.
Sure. I was just actually so happy you brought up the moment of your translation as kind of an example of that type of interaction you're describing, that and those misunderstandings in the process of translation, I think, are an incredible image for transdisciplinary work and this idea of integrative object. I'm a musician and work a lot with classical Persian poetry, so I'm always going back and forth between English and Persian, and also, because of some of my previous studies, Indonesian languages, and trying to find actually those places of misunderstanding as being almost the richest moments, because of whatever recognition of the, I don't know, actually this was the question I kind of had, was the superposition, what exactly that looks like, and maybe in the context of multiple languages, how.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I was thinking about that as well. In a way, when I work with Anne and when we talk, I notice that we have these kind of, they're inaccurate translations, but we both make do with them. Like even in the le droit and the right, the truth, and this, that there could have been this kind of mutual misunderstanding that we could have functioned with throughout. I could imagine us maintaining and continuing to progress in our collaboration, even based on this kind of sort of incorrect or slightly flawed understanding, and that it kind of created this kind of these kind of malformed kind of cogs that they turn inside the machine, but not completely perfectly, and that's a kind of an interesting thing that occurs, and where it means one thing to me and it means one thing to her. They're different, but it means those two things at the same time, because that's our working translation, our working definition of it. And we will progress. We don't end up stopped by this contradiction or and I think that is also a lot to do with the desire to progress and the desire to be inclusive, and that is how those kind of things, it sort of is lubricated by that. Yeah, but I see that Anne has returned, so I'd like to just kind of bring her back into the conversation. Anne, can you hear me?
I think the superposition. I think the superposition of languages. All languages are plural. Said this, and I think when we talk in English, in French, in Farsi, etc., we have a lot of layers of signification, of ambiguities, of amphibologies between terms, and we all choice for translating is an extension of language, because he reinterprets with extension completely the work he translates. And I think it is possible to generalize this idea of translation. Largel is working on philosophy and music. And there is a a general path between them. We can make music with philosophical concepts, and we can. The philosophy is the beautiful music too. I think the two. And you are a musician, Jessica. I think with your life of musician, you can translate between languages with enrichment, very great enrichment. And I think the music is one of the. I write always with music. Music in the ears, always. I cannot write without music. La Ruelle too. We write together with music. It is piano. Pollini, Maurizio Pollini.
It
I
looks
think
like
we just lost her. Yeah.
That's a real cliffhanger.
Oh, that's a shame. I'm just in the sidebar. I'm just going to publish the practical assignment for next week, so you have it. Oh, she's returned.
We can hear you, Anne. Yeah.
Lipati. You can hear? You can hear?
Yes, we can hear you. Yeah.
But perhaps, if that's okay, encore, le dernier...
yes.
Yeah, s'il vous plaît.
Yes.
My light on.
A musician. The path between music and philosophy. I think if we think together the harmony of different philosophies, we have the music of Dinu Lipati. Lipati is a very great pianist who death est mort à 33 ans. Vers 1951. And the idea of equilibrium is very perfect in Lipati. Extraordinary. In FNAC in France, the disc of Lipati are available now. It's a very great. And I think with Maurizio Pollini, have a measure between the empiric and the concepts in philosophy, the transcendental, the perspective, the orientation. He's a specialist of orientation, and he translates Beethoven into Debussy into the more contemporary musician. And if we will treat each concept as a singular parameter, we can hear Glenn Gould. Who interpret Bach as if all the notes are different, is a world and a path from one world to another world. And if we will concept a laboratory of conception of philosophy, we can create a laboratory of creation of philosophy with the multiplicity of philosophy and the generic space. Perhaps Pierre Boulez. But you see, I know only a little classical music. Only. Music is very much large and rich than in classical music. Art is the same. So I think your music is very help to pass from one to one another.
I love what you just said about the Glenn Gould concept of the note as the word and all of the notes as different words. And in a way, I like to even imagine that each of those words might be in a different language. So we have this illusion of the notes being all on the same plane. And
yes,
but
yes.
actually each note might be, and you could really, analyze this scientifically, each note as having its own space. So how the generic space as a way of each of these notes or words or different languages being able to actually interact with each other, although the conflict remains. For example, the timbre might be different. So actually it's not a linear sequence. Or if you look at the way that frequencies change, and the spectral content is changing, and maybe if you think of the development of classical music into the spectral movement with people like Grisset and Pascal Criton, who I think worked with Deleuze, where they really acknowledge that this separation exists, that the notes are separate. The notes maybe is just a concept, but that there's a way that those concepts are used, which is accepted in convention, that doesn't acknowledge actually these varied origins of how they come into being and how they manifest. And for me, especially working with Persian music, and the idea of microtonality becoming something, maybe a kind of superposition to work with.
Oh yes.
So,
oh yes. I think
very interesting.
You are right. Yes, yes. Yes, yes. It is very rich. You can develop this in the exercise with the course. I think this is a layer to article philosophy and art. You have a great device to enrich this problematic.
Yeah, it's true. I could see really nice.
Yeah.
Even
yes, it's very nice.
Alone could be really nicely
The
done.
magnifique.
Yeah, an intersection, or the kind of the lines that you're talking about.
No,
I think could be really nice translated.
I heard in a contemporary compositor of music. He said what you said. The note is not a note. We create the range of timbre and note, and are not the same than in classical music, etc. So the creation is more rich, more than in classical music. The range is not given. The range is created with, and I think there are some relations between this conception with the open work of Umberto Eco. The work Umberto Eco in the open work reflect on about a work as Mozart, or each piece can be interpreted by a pianist, but it is the same work with contemporary composer. It's not the same because we can change the order. There is a space of invention for the interpret who do not exist in the same manner in classical music. He give a name, the open work, and he talks about Stockhausen. Stockhausen is a composer. It's always a work of Stockhausen, but the pianists have a great liberty to interpret, to inverse the movement, the sequence, etc. But it is a work. And perhaps after, there are not only the work of this composer, but more collective moon of creation in music, but we have to create this in philosophy. It's the role of non-exclusion principle and to construct the generic space. We have to make the same in philosophy than new in music and in translation. It's very interesting.
It would be great to hear from the other students now, just to maybe Tal, if you could introduce yourself. And I also see that we were joined by Alexander just a few moments ago. Could we hear from the other students, Theodore? Are their mics turned on?
Yeah, they'll have to, if you just manually, I actually can't unmute you right from here, but you should be able to do so yourself. Up in the upper part of your screen, there's like a little mic icon.
Are you speaking to me? Do you want me to?
No. You're loud and clear. For Tal and Alexander, if they're there. Can you hear us, Tal or Alexander?
Yes.
Or if anyone else would like to introduce themselves.
Tal. I cannot hear.
Oh. Perhaps, Tal, you could introduce yourself in the sidebar. Okay, Yvette, maybe since you are there and able to hear us, Yvette is our guest, and Francoise and I invited her to join us. BRB means be right back,
yeah.
So yeah, Yvette, be right back. Il retourne.
Ah, d'accord.
Mais il n'est pas là maintenant. Yvette, yeah, it would be great to hear any responses that you have, and thanks for joining us also.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Okay, I'm gonna take these out. Yeah, so I am just gonna say a couple of things about my background. So I'm doing a PhD in practice and theory. It's a media art program, similar to what Martinez was saying about, we often work with other disciplines like engineering, where there's a question of how the art practice can do something for something like creating new systems for engineering or for other media-based technologies. So one of the things that I am thinking about often is practice and how practice, as with art, where are the lines between art and practice? And a lot of what I do is thinking about what are those practices. And what I really like about what Anne was saying is it's also similar to method and science. So we have the methods that can create exclusions, or we can have the non-exclusion by thinking about the method and opening up to other methods. And I think this is really something that art also does, but has its own exclusions. And so, when we were talking about the meetings of philosophers, or that philosophy's method has been to compare, I think about those things like to meet and to compare as practices.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering how there can be, this idea or generic space also of thinking. So practices of thinking, but also how does art produce other modes of thinking as well, in addition to the practices, or where do we kind of bring them in with method? I don't know, sort of thinking about all these things at once.
Yeah. It's I feel like the text that I'm delivered it's got a lot inside it.
Oh, wait.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, sorry, I had my...
Oh, that's okay. I was just saying there's a lot inside the text that Anna's delivered, and I think that the exercise that I have said is kind of a way of trying to get you to sort of unpack part of that and kind of create a kind of like I kind of talk about this idea of the diagram maybe being able to bridge those linguistic barriers where it's kind of hard to articulate exactly the concept that's kind of playing in your mind, but maybe through the exercise of trying to create this diagram, things will clarify themselves. But I find this kind of thing, like once you try and commit something to the language of a diagram, it's like, because it's kind of quite reductive in some ways, it's in one way it's very exclusionary because you're making certain decisions about representation, but it also creates that point of negotiation inside you where you have to pick maybe one or two things to sort of bring into play together. But it's also extremely open. I'm kind of interested in this kind of contradictory device of a diagram to talk through that. It'll be really interesting to see like what people come back with, and the interpretation of the diagram being quite open. That's why I just say it's like, it's a line. It's an investigation through a line, and it's two-dimensional this time. And I think that yeah, it'll be nice to see that, and I like this idea of the diagram as an interstice, and that's kind of as in a way it's sort of that in-between place, and this idea that you kind of need to be there to explain a diagram as well. Like they can stand alone, but there's this idea that there's the instructional diagram, and then there's like an explanatory diagram. There's a lot of different categories that the diagram can occupy. And this idea that you might make something that could stand on its own, but I quite like the idea of each person kind of talking through, like where they were coming from. Yvette, you kind of participated in one of my first experiments with this method when we were in Macedonia at that time, and there's some interesting things that came out of that. And I'd like to, I think for this particularly kind of the stuff that that Anne and I are working on, because there's so much kind of, there's so many things going on at the same time, I feel like kind of teasing it out through these little exercises will be a really nice way of kind of creating certain kind of solid things. Do we have Tal, and do we have no, it looks like
I think Alexander left. Yeah,
he's gone, but is Tal there? Can Tal hear us?
it looks like Tal's listening, and he's just typing in the
Oh, he's typing?
typer. Yeah.
Ah, cool.
I think that you create films. You have
Yeah.
creating films, and I think you take, as I talk on generic space, it is a condition of possibility.
Mhm.
When you create film, you take a risk very interesting. And it is another link between thinking and practice. And so I think it is very important. You give your experience of inventing films.
So I also just want to give a time check. We're almost at 3 p.m. right now. I'm happy to stay longer if people would like to, or we can begin to talk about what plans are for next week and wrap up if you'd like to. Oh,
What was the last sentence that Anne said? She said to give something in film.
and Anne, could you repeat the last thing that you said?
Oh, just
Repeat
the very last sentence. You said it's very important to give something in film, but I missed the word.
Yes, it's I think a link between practice and thinking with the film. This is an example in English philosophy with John Mullarkey. You know Mullarkey?
Yeah.
Mullarkey think philosophy with film. We cannot, for him, talk about non-philosophy because language of philosophy cannot approach non-philosophy. So he explained philosophy and non-philosophy with the film. The book has for title all is the title of the book of Mullarkey. On this, voilà, very good. All things are equal. It's
The title,
You need
the
to
link for the Minnesota
unmute.
the book is just in the sidebar, everyone, if you want to have a look there.
Je n'ai pas compris, Alice.
Oh, je dis le lien pour le livre de Jean, c'est dans le chat.
Voilà, d'accord. Oui, c'est très bien. C'est très, très bien. John a mis 5 ans pour écrire ce livre. C'est une great research. 5 years to write this book. It was a great, but just the film and philosophy are very, very linked in this book. Very interesting. With you, music, sculpture, and 2 films with Alice, and thinking with Toll, égalité. Yes, I agree.
Okay,
And,
so will we prepare maybe to finish? Are there any questions on the assignment for the 29th? The response to the course through the text through line? And also, I would have the question, does everyone know how to screen share using the Google Hangout?
Not exactly. How do you do that?
So
I can either walk you through it now or whenever before the class would be fine too. But there's on the left side of your Hangout window, there's a couple of different icons vertically. One of them is green, and it has an arrow that's sort of turning to the right. And if you go to that, it says screen share, and that'll allow you to, so I'll just demonstrate screen share your video. So currently I'm screen sharing. Perfect. It looks like Jessica did that too.
Okay, so that's what we'll be doing when we next get together for the second part of the class. So again, Anne will read a text that we'll have worked on, and then the second part will actually be you guys talking to us and showing us what you've done. As much as I guess there aren't so many students, so if you had quite a lot to say, that would probably be fine. But don't feel like you have to prepare a lot. Just simply kind of take what kind of jumps out at you and what you'd maybe like to investigate through diagram as your starting point. And it's really the conversations that get generated about around these ideas and stuff, and how we sort of cross-pollinate each other in this part of the class that's interesting. Just also to bear in mind the way that the course is laid out. So we're not meeting on the 22nd, so we're meeting the following week, the 29th. And then the week after that, the 5th and the 6th, are 2 days right beside each other. So this will be kind of condensed into the 5th being the more kind of the last major taught part of the course, with speaking from Anna and myself, and then the end of the 5th, and then the 6th being for the presentations of the final works. So I would just refer you to the syllabus, so you get an idea of what the different exercises are going to be. And then if you want to talk to me about that, if you're not sure how the kind of time will work for you, let us know. We're aware that it is quite a tight turnaround for making work, but if you begin to think about that now, with it in mind and reading through the syllabus, that should be something that we can hopefully get working together. So it is this kind of about this exchange. So when we're looking at next week, when we see each other's projects, kind of taking these things into account, and then looking for the third week to create this kind of to create something in physical space, so much more material based and three-dimensional. And then the fourth week, the final project, being this response to another student's work in a method of your choosing, so that there's this kind of cumulative exchange occurring, so that the final piece will be not only like a response to a response to a response, so there's this kind of enveloping levels of interpretation, but also collaboration inside it and different things kind of growing out of it. So that's kind of my prediction, though how it manifests is entirely up to the participants. So yeah, if you have any questions on that between now and next week, you can drop me or Anne an email and we can help you out. But we'll begin with the diagram, as it's kind of maybe the first and easiest kind of expression, and see how we can move it from there. Jessica, I'm also very open to the idea of you producing some music in three-dimensional space, so it doesn't necessarily have to be a sculpture or anything like that. So yeah.
Great.
Yeah, so I guess that's it. Are there any questions further before we finish up?
I just have a quick logistic question. Is everyone here in the classroom that is enrolled right now? The Google Classroom? I
don't know the answer to that, because I'm not in charge of the enrollment. I guess you have to ask Jason.
No. Oh yeah. I was asking if individuals knew if they had logged into the Google Classroom. It's set up so that they can do it themselves.
Oh, sorry, I didn't understand your question.
Oh no, that's fine. But if you are having difficulty with that, just you can reach out to me, and I'll put my email address in the side. Okay, great. Looks like Jessica's in the classroom already too. All right, that's all I had to say.
Is Yvette able to access that classroom? I was wondering, Theodore.
Yeah, I'll send that to Jason. I think that should be possible. Yeah.
Okay, that would be great. Otherwise, we can communicate the materials to her another way, but it would be nice if she could post as well. You know.
Yes, I agree. Yeah. Great.
Okay, cool. Anything else from anyone else? Tal, if you have any questions, maybe get in touch and we can see what we can do. Hopefully we'll have better communication at the end of the, or for the next class. Okay, thanks. Thank you, Theodore.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
you.
Theodore,
Applause.
bye.
You too.
Bye, everyone.
This
Bye-bye.
is thanks
Bye-bye.
so much.